A whooshing sound echoed through the air as Kelvin slowly regained consciousness. He opened his eyes and found himself resting on what looked like a grassy hill. Slowly sitting up, he looked around in confusion. However, the scenery around him felt completely unfamiliar. It didn't look anything like Japan. In fact, Kelvin seriously doubted this was even Earth at all. But then another problem hit him immediately. He suddenly realized he couldn't remember who he was. The moment that thought crossed his mind, a transparent screen suddenly flashed before his eyes. Words appeared across it, welcoming him to another world. Kelvin froze in shock after reading the message. Before he could fully process it, the screen continued explaining that this was the official result of a raffle, and Kelvin had apparently won the prize of being transferred to another world. The absurd explanation only made him even more confused. He demanded to know who was talking to him, but the screen calmly continued as if it couldn't hear his complaints. The system explained that all of Kelvin's memories before the transfer had been erased for the moment. However, it also assured him that there was no reason to worry because he had supposedly given consent beforehand. Kelvin immediately rejected that claim in frustration, unable to believe any part of the situation unfolding before him. Meanwhile, the screen introduced the world as a place filled with swords and magic. Kelvin tried asking if the sound menu could actually hear him, but the system ignored the question entirely and moved on with its explanation. It informed him that he would now receive the skills he had selected before the transfer. A beeping sound echoed as another screen appeared before him. The display listed his name as Kelvin. His class was Summoner, Level 1. Looking over the information, Kelvin muttered that the whole thing felt exactly like a game. However, his attention quickly shifted toward his skills. Both his summoning skill and appraisal skill were ranked S-class. The sound menu explained that the rankings were determined by the amount of assigned skill points. Kelvin immediately assumed that S rank must be the highest possible rank. That also meant he had probably spent an enormous amount of skill points on those abilities before losing his memories. Unfortunately, he couldn't remember any of it. Wanting to understand his situation better, Kelvin decided to check the skill descriptions first. As he selected the information window, detailed explanations began appearing on the screen one after another. The summoning skill, ranked S-class, was described as an ability that allowed the user to form contracts with targets and turn them into familiars. In exchange, the familiars would receive magical power directly from the summoner. Next came green magic, ranked F-class. It was a type of magic that controlled the powers of earth and wind. The skill specialized in maintaining balance between offense, support, and recovery magic. The screen also explained that more magic techniques would become available as the rank increased. After that, Kelvin checked the double growth rate skill. According to the description, all status growth after leveling up would be doubled. Then came double skill points, a skill that doubled the amount of skill points gained after leveling up. Finally, he reviewed the details for the appraisal skill, which was also ranked S-class. The appraisal skill allowed Kelvin to read the status screens of opponents, whether they were living creatures or non-living objects. It could also be used to inspect items and materials. Furthermore, the amount of obtainable information would increase as the skill rank improved. Lastly, Kelvin checked the share experience skill. According to the description, all members within the same party would equally share the experience gained from battles and achievements. After reading through everything, Kelvin admitted that these abilities were surprisingly exceptional. However, what stood out to him the most were the benefits tied to leveling up. Double status growth and double skill points were advantages that sounded almost unfair. Still, one part continued bothering him. The summoning skill mentioned the need to form a pact before summoning anything. Kelvin couldn't fully understand what it meant by providing magic power to the summoned target. In response, the sound menu calmly explained the process. The moment a pact was formed, the target would become a magic container synchronized directly with Kelvin himself. Furthermore, summoning an actual being would consume MP. During the period of summoning, his MP would continuously decrease over time. That process was referred to as magic provision, and at the same time, it also strengthened the summoned target. After hearing the explanation, Kelvin thanked the sound menu for clearing things up. However, the system immediately shifted the conversation and suggested that they should first head toward the nearest city. According to the sound menu, the city contained an adventurers guild, so registering there would likely be the best option. Kelvin laughed awkwardly after hearing that. Up until now, he had assumed the sound menu existed only to provide instructions and explanations. But then he realized something strange. The way it spoke almost sounded like it intended to travel together with him. The sound menu laughed in response and remarked that Kelvin truly had no recollection of anything. Then it suggested he take a look at another screen. The moment the display appeared, Kelvin froze in shock. The screen showed the name Melfina. Most of the information was marked as classified. However, several details were still visible. 1,276 years old. Everything else remained completely hidden behind classified tags. Melfina then revealed that this was the first time someone had ever dared to ask a god like her to become a familiar. The revelation completely stunned Kelvin. He could hardly process the fact that the being speaking to him was actually a goddess. Meanwhile, Melfina casually asked him to take care of her from now on. Hearing that only made Kelvin even more frustrated. At that moment, he seriously began wondering what kind of reckless choices he had made before transferring to this world. Melfina finally revealed the truth behind Kelvin's missing memories. Since he didn't have enough points to obtain all the skills he wanted, he had willingly traded his memories in exchange for additional skill points. After that, Melfina herself, the goddess in charge of his transfer, formed a pact with him. However, the explanation didn't stop there. Before losing his memories, Kelvin had apparently confessed his love to Melfina and insisted that she come with him into the new world. He had even declared that even if his memories disappeared, he would simply fall in love with her all over again. The moment Kelvin heard that, he was completely disgusted with himself. He immediately told Melfina to stop talking about it. But then another thought suddenly crossed his mind. If they had truly formed a pact together, then technically that meant he should be able to summon Melfina as well. Melfina calmly explained that such a thing was impossible for now. As a level 1 summoner, Kelvin simply didn't possess enough MP to summon a being on the level of a god. Normal familiars were one thing, but gods existed on an entirely different scale. Hearing that, Kelvin let out a laugh. In his mind, the situation already sounded ridiculous enough. He had traded away his memories for skills and somehow ended up making a pact with an actual goddess. Still, Kelvin stretched his arms confidently and decided on a clear goal. Before anything else, he would continue leveling up until the day he could finally summon Melfina properly. Melfina happily replied that she was eagerly looking forward to both his achievements and his future love confessions. Kelvin immediately told her to leave the love confession part out of it. A short while later, Melfina suddenly pointed something out in the distance and asked if Kelvin could see it. Looking ahead, Kelvin spotted a massive city far away. As they got closer, he realized just how enormous it truly was. Later, Kelvin finally arrived at the city entrance and stepped inside. He looked around curiously while taking in the lively atmosphere around him. Melfina announced that they had officially arrived. Right in front of them stood the Adventurers Guild. Kelvin stared at the large building in amazement. The structure looked absolutely fabulous to him. Excited, he immediately headed inside, eager to see what the guild had to offer. However, the moment he entered, several adventurers inside turned toward him with grumpy expressions. Melfina quietly wondered what the strange atmosphere was about, but Kelvin admitted he had no idea either. Some time later, after waiting through the registration process, the receptionist thanked Kelvin for his patience and handed him his guild identification card. But then Melfina noticed something unusual. According to the guild registration, Kelvin's occupation was displayed as Green Priest instead of Summoner. Kelvin immediately became confused. Earlier, Melfina had explained that Summoner was an extremely rare occupation, with at most one Summoner existing in each country. More than anything else, Kelvin simply wanted freedom in this fantasy world. Still confused about the guild system, he asked the receptionist what the F-class on his guild card actually meant. In response, the receptionist politely began explaining how the Adventurers Guild ranking system worked. According to her, the adventurer world was divided into a total of 7 classes. At the very top stood S-class, known as the Supermen. Below them were the A-class monsters, followed by the B-class masters. Then came the C-class veterans, the D-class normals, the E-class novices, and finally the F-class newbies. Since Kelvin had just joined the guild, he would naturally begin from F-class. The receptionist then explained that adventurers receive quests through the guild. Every request is ranked according to difficulty and later posted on the guild's announcement board for adventurers to choose from. Kelvin confirmed whether he could only accept F-class quests for the time being. However, the receptionist explained that adventurers were actually allowed to take quests one rank above their own class. Even so, she warned him to be careful. If he failed a quest, there were situations where he would be required to compensate for the broken contract. In Kelvin's mind, it sounded like lower-ranked adventurers truly had no business recklessly challenging higher-ranked jobs. The receptionist continued her explanation and introduced the 4 main categories of quests within the guild. Those categories were conquering quests, bodyguard quests, gathering quests, and specific quests. She also informed him that successfully completing 10 quests in a row would allow him to rank up to the next class. However, once an adventurer reached C-class, simply completing quests would no longer be enough. From that point onward, rank-up exams would also become mandatory. Kelvin nodded after understanding the explanation. Then he asked what kind of quest would be suitable for a complete beginner like himself. The receptionist soon handed him his very first task. Later, Kelvin found himself battling slimes outside the city. He swung his weapon once again, striking another blue slime directly. The creature was knocked backward and slammed into the ground. After defeating it, Kelvin quietly muttered that 3 blue slimes had now been defeated. With that, the basic quest was essentially complete. Earlier, he had already spent almost all the money he had left just to buy a staff. Although Kelvin lacked physical strength, he figured his small amount of magic power would be enough for now. More importantly, he absolutely had to complete this quest and receive the reward. Otherwise, he would lose both dinner and a place to sleep for the night. At that moment, Melfina suggested that he try using his appraisal skill. According to her, an S-rank appraisal skill would allow Kelvin to inspect even rank 5 items without difficulty. It could also analyze opponents above level 100. Hearing that immediately caught Kelvin's attention. Level 100 opponents sounded terrifying enough on their own. If he ever encountered enemies like that, he would probably be finished instantly. But then another thought suddenly came to him. Kelvin remembered trying to view Melfina's status earlier, only to see nearly everything marked as classified. Curious, he asked why her information couldn't be appraised properly. Melfina simply laughed and reminded him that she was a goddess after all. When Kelvin used his appraisal skill on the slime, detailed information immediately appeared before him. The creature only had 3 HP remaining. Its strength, resistance, and magic stats were all at 1 point each. Meanwhile, its agility and luck stats were slightly higher at 2 points. After checking the slime's condition, Melfina explained something important to him. If the monster was incapable of understanding human language, there was no need to kill it immediately. Instead, Kelvin could simply weaken the creature first and then request to form a pact with it. According to her, the monster would almost certainly agree afterward. Kelvin accepted the advice and decided to give it a try. The moment he activated pact forming, Kelvin immediately felt something strange happen inside his body. He was startled as his body reacted on its own. It almost felt like something was trying to force its way out from within him. Feeling uneasy, Kelvin quickly asked if the process was actually safe. Melfina casually explained that the sensation was merely a side effect caused by losing a portion of his magic power. However, she also added that regardless of whether the pact succeeded or failed, using the pact skill would automatically consume half of his remaining MP. Hearing that made Kelvin groan in frustration. He complained that she really should have explained that part beforehand. Suddenly, a small explosion burst out in front of him. Kelvin immediately asked whether the pact had succeeded. A small sphere-like creature appeared before him. Seeing it, Melfina congratulated him and confirmed that the pact formation had been successful. Kelvin stared at the creature in surprise. Even he couldn't believe he had actually managed to do it. Melfina then pointed out that the newly contracted familiar still didn't have a name. She suggested that Kelvin give it one. After thinking for a moment, Kelvin quietly proposed the name Clotho and wondered if it would be acceptable. The moment he said the name, Kelvin suddenly noticed a strange feeling flowing into his mind. Curious, he realized that his new familiar seemed incredibly happy. Melfina explained that Kelvin could communicate directly with his familiars through thoughts alone. There was no need for spoken words between them. Kelvin was genuinely amazed after hearing that. Then he remembered the strange exchange he had just experienced with Clotho. Realizing how naturally their thoughts connected, he understood how incredibly convenient this ability would become when commanding familiars in battle. It was an extremely useful skill. After that, Kelvin decided it was time for the real test. He pushed his staff forward and called for Clotho to come to him. The slime familiar energetically bounced around before finally stopping directly in front of Kelvin. Seeing the successful summon made Kelvin feel relieved. Forming the pact had already consumed half of his MP, and summoning Clotho afterward had drained even more magic power. At his current level, that meant he probably only had enough MP left to cast magic one more time. However, before he could relax, a new problem appeared. Behind him, a group of slimes slowly approached. Kelvin turned around in surprise just as the slimes suddenly inflated their bodies. The slimes slowly closed in on Kelvin from all sides. Seeing another slime appear behind the others immediately caught him off guard. Melfina quickly warned him to stay careful, while Kelvin replied that he already knew that. Without wasting time, he ordered Clotho to deal with one of the slimes. At the same time, he reminded his familiar not to destroy the slime's core since he still needed the heart to complete the guild quest. Suddenly, vines burst out from the slimes and lashed toward Kelvin. One of them barely grazed his cheek as it passed by. Kelvin immediately reacted and activated his F-rank green magic skill. Wind blades. Sharp gusts sliced through the air, instantly scattering the attacking slimes apart. The moment he turned back toward the remaining enemy, Kelvin signaled for Clotho to attack. However, he almost failed to follow the slime familiar's movement with his eyes. Clotho moved at a speed completely different from before the pact had been formed. Shocked by the sudden change, Kelvin immediately used appraisal on Clotho once again. The status screen displayed Clotho as a level 1 blue slime. Genderless. Age, 0 years old. But what truly stunned Kelvin were the stats. Every single one of Clotho's attributes had risen beyond 200 points. Kelvin froze in disbelief after seeing the numbers. The increase was over 100 points across the board. He couldn't understand how such a ridiculous boost was even possible. Melfina calmly explained that ordinary enhancement skills at B rank or C rank could usually only increase stats by roughly 10 to 20 points at most. Hearing that made Kelvin realize just how absurd his summoning skill truly was. At level 1 alone, this kind of enhancement almost felt like cheating. He couldn't help but laugh at the thought. Later, after completing the quest, Kelvin returned to the Adventurers Guild and received his reward money. Holding the coins in his hand, he proudly declared the mission a success. At that moment, he even started feeling like he might actually have been born to become an adventurer. At the very least, the reward would be enough to pay for an inn tonight. However, while walking outside afterward, Kelvin noticed a crowd gathering nearby. Curious, he looked toward the source of the commotion. Melfina quickly confirmed what he was seeing. They were slaves. Among the cages, Kelvin spotted a single girl sitting quietly inside. She was an elf. The moment his eyes met hers, Kelvin stopped walking completely. The elf slowly lowered her head and closed her eyes as tears quietly formed. Nearby, the merchant loudly praised the merchandise to potential buyers. According to him, anyone who recognized quality would understand how rare this catch truly was. The elf was only half-elf, and although she appeared weak, he insisted she was actually an unpolished gem. Considering the asking price, he claimed it was an incredible bargain. Then the merchant suddenly noticed Kelvin standing nearby and encouraged him to take a closer look. He proudly declared that every slave there was high-quality merchandise and told Kelvin to take his time browsing. Melfina then quietly asked Kelvin what he planned to do now. Kelvin slowly turned his face away and answered that he planned to do nothing. And just like that, the veil covering his new life as an adventurer in another world slowly began to lift. Kelvin had leveled up. He became ecstatic and immediately wondered if this was really how it worked. In his mind, this was exactly like the systems he always saw in video games. He called out to Melfina for confirmation, and Melfina calmly acknowledged it while congratulating him on leveling up. That only made Kelvin even more excited. Melfina then instructed him to select the skill category on the status screen. She explained that he could exchange his experience points for brand new skills. However, before continuing, Kelvin suddenly called out to her again. Melfina asked what it was, and Kelvin questioned whether the status screen in this world was freely accessible at any time. Melfina confirmed that it was. From now on, all he had to do was think about his status, and the screen would automatically appear before him. However, when it came to viewing another person's status, before she could finish, Kelvin immediately realized the answer. He concluded that he would need an appraisal skill for that. In his mind, this world felt more and more like a simulation game. And because he had seemingly been born with all of these abilities already, he started wondering if he truly lacked anything at all. Kelvin pressed on the screen, and his updated stats appeared before him. The display informed him that he had obtained 100 skill points. The moment he saw the numbers, he was stunned. Every single stat had increased dramatically thanks to his double skill points and double growth rate abilities. On top of that, he now had an extra 100 skill points available. He immediately attempted to exchange points for skills first, but the moment the screen expanded, he let out a shocked screech. Countless skills appeared before him. The list was far larger than he expected. Melfina explained that even more skills would unlock in the future. She also told him that there were certain abilities he still could not exchange for because he had yet to meet the necessary requirements. An idea suddenly crossed Kelvin's mind. He pointed out that the required points for exchanging skills did not actually seem that high. F-rank skills only required 10 points each. That realization made him even more confused. Just moments ago he only had 5 points, yet after leveling up he suddenly gained around 100. Even considering his double skill point bonus, the amount still felt absurdly high to him. Melfina then explained that people normally had to start from the lowest rank skills and slowly work their way upward over time. In order to eventually obtain a single S-rank skill, a person would need roughly 1,270 points in total. Kelvin quickly came to a conclusion after hearing that. A normal person, even after reaching level 100, would probably only be capable of obtaining a B-rank skill at best. Melfina confirmed that his understanding was correct. That realization immediately made Kelvin think about himself. At only level 1, he already possessed 2 S-rank skills. Melfina scoffed at that comparison. After all, those skills had not come for free. He had traded away his memories in exchange for them. Kelvin started thinking that the calculations still felt slightly off. He wondered if people transferred from other worlds were all granted this kind of unbelievable advantage. However, he highly doubted that was the case. Melfina asked Kelvin what kind of skill he planned to exchange for next. Kelvin immediately pointed toward the skill called Conceal. He explained that his ability to gain skills was completely different from that of ordinary people. Because of that, revealing his true abilities while he was still low level would be far too dangerous. Hiding that information had already become his top priority. Melfina then asked if he meant that he intended to conceal his status entirely. Kelvin quickly confirmed it. He became excited again and declared that he would spend 70 out of his 100 points to raise his conceal skill all the way to D rank. In truth, he already wanted to push the skill to B rank as soon as possible. At that moment, Melfina informed him that Clotho appeared to have leveled up as well. Kelvin became curious and immediately checked Clotho's status screen. As expected, Clotho had gained a brand new skill. The screen displayed the skill Absorb, currently at F rank. The skill allowed Clotho to absorb a portion of magic and convert it into HP. The absorbed magic could also be released as a magic attack. Furthermore, leveling up the skill would strengthen its absorption ability even more. Kelvin found the skill extremely interesting. The fact that Clotho could use absorbed magic both for healing and offense made it surprisingly versatile. However, because today's battle had ended so easily, Kelvin let his guard down slightly and yawned. Melfina immediately warned him not to underestimate his enemies. She explained that monsters could sometimes evolve into entirely different forms after reaching higher levels. That statement immediately caught Kelvin's attention. He stopped and questioned Melfina further, asking whether monsters automatically evolved once they leveled up. Melfina clarified that level alone was not always the deciding factor. However, slimes in particular possessed extremely diverse evolution paths. The moment Kelvin heard that, his motivation exploded. Without hesitation, he suddenly dashed forward. Melfina became confused and asked where he was going so suddenly. Kelvin answered that after hearing about monster evolution, he suddenly felt like leveling up even more. He laughed excitedly and called for Clotho to follow him. Clotho immediately bounced after him while Melfina could only remain speechless watching the two rush off. Later on, inside the guild, a receptionist called out to Kelvin. She congratulated him and informed him that he had successfully completed his quest and officially ranked up into an E-class adventurer. The receptionist then curiously asked whether Kelvin was perhaps a court magician serving some kingdom. After all, despite not belonging to any party, he managed to rise in rank within only a single week. On top of that, he consistently completed quests that were ranked above his own level. The surrounding adventurers immediately became interested after overhearing the conversation. The receptionist continued praising him, pointing out that although Kelvin was technically still a newcomer, he was clearly very strong. Kelvin could only laugh awkwardly at the attention. He apologized and explained that he could not reveal too much about himself. The receptionist quickly backed down and admitted that she was the one asking too much about an adventurer's private life. Meanwhile, Melfina quietly muttered to herself that Kelvin was a summoner from another world. If he ever joined a party, his secret would almost certainly be exposed sooner or later. Kelvin immediately reacted in his mind, telling Melfina to keep quiet. Trying to shift the conversation, Kelvin informed the receptionist that from now on he wanted to start accepting D-class quests instead of E-class ones. The receptionist agreed without issue. However, she pointed out that he would probably need better equipment soon. His clothes and even his staff had remained exactly the same for the entire week. Kelvin laughed and acknowledged her point. Still, deep down, he honestly never felt the need to replace anything. The S-rank summoning spell he used for Clotho was already overwhelmingly powerful on its own. Suddenly, the guild door opened. A man entered while casually suggesting that if Kelvin wanted a D-class quest, then perhaps he should try defeating the Dark Spirit Knight. Kelvin immediately became curious and wondered who the man was. The receptionist recognized him right away and called out his name, Cashel. She even sounded surprised that he had already returned. Cashel casually greeted her and mentioned that he had only just come back a short while ago. Angie praised him for working hard on his quest, but Cashel confidently brushed it off. In his mind, everything naturally ended well. Even though the battle inside the dragon's dwelling had been fierce, it was still only a C-class mission in the end. He even threw in a playful wink afterward. Kelvin then asked for his name directly. Cashel immediately realized he had not introduced himself yet. He proudly revealed that he was Cashel, a D-class adventurer. His class was Magic Swordsman, his level was 34, and he was a 25-year-old human male. He also possessed the title Demon Killer. The adventurers standing behind Kelvin quietly murmured among themselves after hearing that introduction. However, despite all the boasting, Cashel's actual abilities were apparently only ranked around B-class. The adventurers around the guild quietly whispered among themselves. According to them, Cashel always enjoyed bullying newcomers. Another adventurer commented that Cashel was probably just trying to show off in front of the rookie who kept accepting quests above his own rank. However, another adventurer immediately warned them to stay out of it. None of them wanted to get on Cashel's bad side. The moment Cashel glanced toward them, the group quickly scattered away. One of them muttered that there was no point arguing anyway. After all, nobody in the guild was stronger than Cashel. Cashel then casually mentioned that the next time his party went after the Dark Spirit Knight, he could talk about letting Kelvin join them. He explained that everyone had already been talking about the promising newcomer. After hearing that Kelvin handled E-class quests without difficulty, Cashel became interested in him. However, the receptionist quickly interrupted. She warned Cashel not to underestimate the situation. Even though the mission was officially classified as a D-class quest now, the target was still the Dark Spirit Knight. According to multiple reports, the monster was far stronger than expected. On top of that, Kelvin had only just become an E-class adventurer. Cashel simply smiled and brushed the concern aside. As far as he was concerned, there was nothing to worry about because he would personally protect Kelvin if necessary. After hearing everything, Kelvin calmly apologized and declined the invitation to join Cashel's party. Cashel quietly muttered to himself after hearing the refusal. In his eyes, Kelvin had only just climbed out of F-class. Nobody would laugh at him for acting cautiously. However, Kelvin immediately stopped him from misunderstanding the situation. Cashel looked genuinely surprised. Kelvin then confidently declared that he intended to fight alone. Not only that, he even challenged Cashel directly by asking if he wanted to make a bet on who would defeat the Dark Spirit Knight first. A smirk formed across Kelvin's face as he said it. Meanwhile, Cashel simply smiled back before turning around and walking out of the guild. The moment he left, Melfina immediately questioned whether Kelvin had truly been listening to everything carefully. Kelvin himself already suspected the entire thing might have been a trap. After all, Demon Killer was not a title someone obtained by beating weak opponents. Cashel's entire party also felt suspicious to him. Still, Kelvin saw this as the perfect opportunity to test the results of his training. In fact, he even wondered if Cashel himself might become a good opponent someday. Melfina became speechless after hearing that. From her perspective, Kelvin's entire strategy sounded like the behavior of a complete battle maniac. Kelvin immediately told her that she was being too noisy. Meanwhile, outside on the road, Cashel met up with his companions. He asked one of them what he thought about Kelvin. The one he questioned was Gimru, a 19-year-old male thief at level 27. His title was Ward Thief. Standing beside Gimru was Raj, a 33-year-old berserker at level 36 who carried the title Barbarian. Gimru explained that even though his appraisal skill had already reached C rank, he still could not view Kelvin's status at all. Gimru admitted that the newbie might be far more dangerous than they originally thought. However, Cashel only scoffed after hearing that assessment. In his eyes, Kelvin still looked like nothing more than a reckless idiot who loved taking unnecessary risks. Still, even Cashel had started to suspect that Kelvin was hiding something beneath the surface. At that moment, Raj called out to Cashel and demanded to go first when the time came. Raj confidently declared that he would make Kelvin experience pain personally, just like always. Cashel immediately told Raj to calm down. Raj looked surprised by the response, but Gimru quickly sided with Cashel. He reminded Raj that they constantly had to tell him the same thing every single day. He needed to slow down, think carefully, and stop relying purely on brute strength before causing another disaster. Raj brushed the criticism aside without caring at all. To him, those details were meaningless. In his mind, they simply needed to kill Kelvin and finish the job. Gimru sighed and commented that Raj truly never changed. His brain was still completely filled with muscle. Meanwhile, Cashel quietly muttered to himself, wondering if the newcomer would at least entertain him a little. The next day, inside the D-class dungeon known as Evil Spirit's Ancient Castle, Kelvin pushed open the massive doors and charged deeper inside. Fierce battles soon unfolded throughout the dungeon. Later on, when Cashel's party finally arrived, they froze in complete shock at the scene waiting for them. Every monster inside had already been slaughtered. Raj stared at the corpses in disbelief. All the enemies had already been wiped out. Gimru found the situation impossible to believe. He questioned whether Kelvin had truly done all of this alone. At that moment, even the rumors about Kelvin effortlessly clearing E-class quests suddenly felt completely real to him. Then, from behind them, Kelvin's voice casually echoed through the dungeon. Kelvin calmly greeted Cashel and pointed out that he had finally arrived. He then mentioned that the Dark Spirit Knight seemed to be waiting behind the next door ahead. As Cashel looked at Kelvin more carefully, his eyes landed on the green staff Kelvin carried. Immediately, he recognized it as equipment specialized for green magic. That realization made Cashel wonder if Kelvin was actually a green magician. Meanwhile, Gimru silently thought Kelvin was an idiot. After going through so much effort to conceal his abilities, Kelvin still chose to wear equipment that practically exposed part of his fighting style anyway. Raj only scoffed at the situation. Kelvin then reminded them about their bet to see who could defeat the target first. Raj immediately questioned Kelvin's true intentions. If the contest was real, then why was Kelvin waiting for them here? Raj wondered if Kelvin was scheming something. Perhaps Kelvin realized he could not defeat the Dark Spirit Knight alone and wanted their help instead. However, Kelvin confidently declared that he fully intended to win the bet himself. The real reason he waited here was much simpler. From the very beginning, their actual target had been him all along. Kelvin then calmly stated that he would personally become their opponent instead. The entire group became visibly shocked. Gimru immediately called out to Cashel in confusion, unable to understand how Kelvin discovered their plan. In his mind, it should have been impossible. Cashel started considering the possibilities. Perhaps the guild had secretly warned Kelvin beforehand. Or perhaps Kelvin had targeted Raj from the very beginning because of the bounty on his head. Raj then added another observation. Kelvin's conceal skill must have been ranked extremely high as well. Cashel started wondering if Kelvin had been pretending to be a harmless rookie this entire time just to hunt people with bounties on their heads. Meanwhile, Kelvin himself became curious after hearing that and wondered if there truly was a bounty placed on them. Melfina simply dismissed the thought, pointing out that regardless of the answer, nothing about the situation actually changed. Kelvin agreed with her immediately. Kelvin then calmly asked if they were ready. Right after that, he mocked Raj by calling him chubby and told him to stop hiding in the back and come straight at him already. Raj instantly exploded in anger. He demanded to know who Kelvin was calling chubby. Then he cursed at Kelvin, calling him nothing more than a damned magician before charging forward recklessly. Cashel immediately warned Raj not to get provoked so easily. However, by then, Kelvin had already closed his eyes calmly. Suddenly, Raj stopped in his tracks. A strange puddle had appeared beneath him. Confused, he demanded to know what Kelvin was trying to do. Kelvin only smiled in response. Kelvin had just activated D-rank green magic, Rooting Swamp. The spell created a bottomless swamp capable of swallowing enemies whole. The moment Cashel realized what happened, he cursed under his breath. It was not merely the spell itself that shocked him. Kelvin had also used Conceal to completely hide the existence of the swamp beforehand. Gimru became horrified. Even his own concealment detection abilities failed to notice the trap at all. Raj furiously shouted that it was only a swamp. With his raw strength, he believed he could easily force his way back out. However, Kelvin immediately followed up with another chant. This time, he activated F-rank green magic, Windblade. The attack flew directly toward Raj, but its range also reached Cashel at the same time. Gimru immediately called out in panic. Raj yelled at him not to run away. However, Gimru quickly apologized and admitted that he had to escape first. His instincts were screaming at him that Kelvin was far too dangerous. Cashel became furious after hearing that. Without hesitation, he charged straight toward Kelvin himself. At that moment, Melfina informed Kelvin that Gimru had already fled while Cashel would reach him within seconds. Kelvin calmly replied that he already knew. Everything was happening exactly according to his calculations. Right after that, he summoned Clotho and ordered it to block the entrance. A magic circle suddenly appeared directly ahead of the fleeing Gimru. Then the ground violently exploded apart. Gimru immediately looked upward in horror and demanded to know what kind of monster he was looking at. Standing before him was a gigantic Clotho. Its status displayed level 12, genderless, 0 years old, and belonging to the slime race known as Slime Gratonia. Then Clotho slowly opened its massive mouth wide and aimed directly at Gimru. A few days earlier, Kelvin believed he had already done enough for the day's quest. However, he suddenly noticed something strange about Clotho and immediately wondered what was wrong. At first, he suspected that Clotho had simply become exhausted from fighting. Melfina quickly corrected him. Clotho was not tired at all. Instead, it was attempting to evolve. Back in the present, Clotho violently slammed the ground. Gimru desperately tried to run away while panicking in disbelief. In his eyes, the slime before him had become a complete monster. He desperately wanted it to stay away from him. Clotho had evolved into a creature known as Slime Gratonia. Hundreds of years ago, a single one of these monsters nearly drove the aquatic kingdom of Taraji to the brink of destruction. Taraji itself was a magic kingdom filled with powerful royal blue magic users. However, none of their magic worked against Gratonia because the monster simply absorbed every attack without suffering any damage. In the end, nobody could stop it until the hero personally defeated it. After hearing that story, Kelvin commented that it sounded more like a demon lord than a slime. Melfina then revealed something even more shocking. According to old rumors, Slime Gratonia was considered the second strongest existence in the world, surpassed only by the Demon King himself. Kelvin immediately became curious and asked whether the hero from the legends truly existed. Melfina calmly confirmed that the hero was still alive even now. In fact, he had also been transferred into this world by her personally. Kelvin became completely shocked by that revelation. Melfina then explained that the goddess of the Golden Divine Kingdom of Doramisu had once performed a ritual to summon people from another world. That was how individuals like the hero arrived here in the first place. Kelvin quietly muttered to himself that Melfina had apparently been involved in some incredibly outrageous things. Melfina immediately brushed the topic aside and claimed it was better for him not to learn too much about them. She admitted that she had already grown tired of dealing with those kinds of people. That was one of the reasons she decided to stay with Kelvin instead. Back in the battle, Gimru's body violently crashed against the wall after being struck away. Raj gritted his teeth in frustration and shouted Gimru's name repeatedly. Meanwhile, Kelvin calmly observed the scene and quietly commented that this was apparently the limit of what 81 endurance could handle. Enraged, Raj slammed his fist into the floor and activated a technique known as Strike from the Angry Demon. His body immediately began floating from the overwhelming power surging through him. Kelvin glanced toward Raj carefully. Raj then shouted for Cashel to leave the slime to him alone. As far as Raj was concerned, Cashel should simply stand aside. However, Cashel immediately refused. His true target had always been the newcomer himself. Kelvin quietly welcomed that decision. It was exactly what he wanted. Cashel then activated E-rank white magic, Karma. Kelvin immediately recognized the spell. It was magic capable of increasing luck while also boosting natural healing abilities. The next instant, Cashel dashed forward and swung his sword directly toward Kelvin. Kelvin reacted in surprise. Cashel's speed was incredible. An agility stat of 126 was no joke at all. Without hesitation, Kelvin immediately activated D-rank green magic together with his wind kick skill. Kelvin managed to dodge Cashel's attack at the very last second. However, Cashel immediately continued his assault without slowing down. Strike after strike came flying toward Kelvin, while Kelvin kept countering and evading at the same time. As the battle continued, Cashel started getting irritated. He realized that Kelvin had most likely used magic to enhance his agility. At first, Cashel thought Kelvin might be some kind of trainer because of the monster he summoned. However, he quickly corrected himself. Kelvin was clearly a summoner instead. Kelvin avoided another slash and quietly whispered that Cashel's conclusion was correct. Cashel let out an amused snicker after hearing that. It was apparently his first time fighting someone with a summoning ability. To him, Kelvin's rare skill looked incredibly interesting. In fact, Cashel became excited by the thought that defeating someone with such a rare ability would probably raise his own level even faster. Kelvin became visibly shocked after hearing that reasoning. He could hardly believe Cashel murdered people for something as selfish as leveling up more efficiently. Their weapons violently clashed against each other once again. Cashel grinned and openly admitted that killing adventurers and other skilled people rewarded far more experience points than ordinary monsters ever could. The stronger the target was, the more valuable the reward became. Kelvin tightened his grip around his green staff and calmly pointed something out. A scumbag like Cashel had probably never once challenged opponents who were genuinely stronger than him. Cashel immediately demanded to know what Kelvin meant by that. Kelvin continued without hesitation. In his eyes, Cashel was terrified of fighting monsters stronger than himself. That fear was exactly why he intentionally kept himself around that rank instead of aiming higher. Kelvin further pointed out that Cashel was also afraid of battling stronger people. That was why he spent his time targeting weak newcomers instead. Cashel instantly exploded in anger and shouted at Kelvin to shut up while denying every accusation. However, Kelvin remained calm. He told Cashel that if he truly wanted strength, then he should actually become stronger and challenge opponents above his level instead of preying on the weak. Otherwise, no matter how much he leveled up, Cashel would remain nothing more than a cowardly weakling forever. Cashel furiously shouted at Kelvin to shut up once again before rushing straight toward him. Kelvin only grinned and calmly questioned whether Cashel was getting angry already. Then, with perfect timing, he dodged the incoming attack again. Meanwhile, Raj roared loudly as he unleashed kick from the angry demon against Clotho. His kick landed directly on the slime's body. However, the moment the attack connected, Raj became confused and frustrated. He could not understand what kind of material Clotho's slime body was even made from. No matter how hard he struck, every single attack felt completely useless. Clotho then raised its tentacles and instantly wrapped them around Raj's body. Raj desperately shouted to be released, but the slime's grip only tightened further. Moments later, Clotho completely swallowed him whole. Back on Kelvin's side, Cashel challenged him to finally show his true abilities. Immediately afterward, Cashel activated Hazy Sword Edge and swung his blade forward. Kelvin simply grinned before chanting C-rank green magic, Wall Cliff. A massive wall suddenly erupted upward from the ground. Cashel laughed at the sight and dismissed it as nothing more than a simple mud wall that could easily be destroyed in a single strike. However, the next instant, Kelvin suddenly appeared directly behind him. Kelvin calmly pointed out that thanks to the wall, Cashel completely lost sight of him. Cashel immediately cursed after realizing his mistake. Without hesitation, Kelvin activated Hurricane Sword. The attack struck Cashel directly across the body. The sheer force tore Cashel in half instantly. Even so, Cashel somehow remained conscious long enough to speak in complete shock. He admitted that he never expected Kelvin to possess an A-rank skill powerful enough to do something like that. Kelvin calmly replied that apparently Cashel had been hiding quite a lot himself too. Melfina then commented that Kelvin sure enjoyed lecturing others, despite barely having experience fighting truly powerful opponents himself. Kelvin quietly accepted the criticism. Then he told Melfina that he was finally about to face one now. Right after that, he pushed open the large door ahead of him. Standing inside was the Black Soul Knight. Kelvin immediately checked the knight's status. The enemy's name was Gerard, a level 53 Black Knight. He was a male leader-class monster who had existed for 138 years. Instead of becoming nervous, Kelvin immediately became interested. A level 53 enemy with an actual name made him think of something else entirely. Rather than defeating Gerard, Kelvin suddenly wanted to recruit him as a companion instead. Melfina noticed that Kelvin looked completely unworried despite facing such a dangerous opponent. Gerard slowly pulled out his sword and demanded to know why Kelvin had entered this place. Kelvin calmly explained that his original purpose truly was to defeat Gerard. However, after seeing him personally, he changed his mind. Kelvin then introduced himself as a summoner and declared that he wanted to form a pact with Gerard instead. Gerard's laughter echoed throughout the entire dungeon. Gerard admitted that recently, countless insolent humans had wandered into this place. Some merely came hoping to witness the existence of the infamous Dark Spirit Knight for themselves. Others arrived with the intention of slaying him. However, someone like Kelvin was completely different. According to Gerard, Kelvin was the first young priest bold enough to casually start a conversation with him. On top of that, Kelvin was a summoner who openly attempted to form a pact with him instead of trying to kill him outright. To Gerard, the entire situation was genuinely interesting. In fact, it had already improved his mood considerably. Kelvin was surprisingly entertaining to talk with. Then Gerard casually sat down on the ground and even offered Kelvin some candy. Kelvin accepted it while quietly thinking that Gerard was far more talkative than he expected. He never imagined that the feared Dark Spirit Knight would turn out to be this kind of person. Melfina commented that the scene looked less like a confrontation and more like a friendly old grandfather happily talking to someone who finally understood him. As Kelvin chewed the candy, he immediately noticed something strange about the taste. He asked Gerard how long he had been carrying it around because it tasted incredibly weird. Gerard honestly admitted that he never expected Kelvin to actually eat it. From Gerard's perspective, Kelvin had already earned some respect for willingly putting that thing into his mouth. After all, the candy was probably over 100 years old by now. The moment Kelvin heard that, he immediately spit the candy out while cursing at Gerard. Then he demanded that Gerard stop fooling around and finally reveal his true nature. Gerard then became more serious and admitted that he himself honestly did not fully understand his current existence either. Long ago, he served as the leader of the Night Legions of a kingdom known as Urukul. However, at some point he somehow became an immortal being. Even now, he still could not figure out exactly how it happened. For a brief moment, silence filled the room. Then Gerard awkwardly laughed and admitted that his memories about those events were unclear. Lately, he had started wondering if perhaps he remained in this world because he still had unfinished business left behind. Kelvin bluntly commented that Gerard might simply be confused because of old age. Melfina immediately reminded Kelvin that he was supposed to be negotiating a pact, not insulting the potential companion. Gerard then explained that the king he once served had already passed away long ago. Even the kingdom itself no longer existed. Because of that, the thought of serving another master was not something he could easily accept. However, before Gerard could continue, Kelvin already understood what he meant. Gerard wanted to see whether Kelvin truly possessed enough ability to be acknowledged by him. Kelvin accepted that immediately, but he also imposed one condition of his own. Gerard had to fight with everything he had. If Gerard held back at all, then the entire battle would become meaningless. Gerard found that response amusing. He questioned whether Kelvin truly intended to show off his strength in front of a higher existence like himself. The more Gerard listened, the more interesting Kelvin became in his eyes. Gerard even started wondering if Kelvin might simply be addicted to fighting altogether. Kelvin dismissed the conversation and told Gerard to stop dragging things out and just get started already. Then Kelvin confidently challenged him and told the old man to bring it on. Gerard immediately corrected him. He was not simply an old man. His name was Gerard, and Kelvin needed to remember it properly. At the same time, Gerard continued referring to Kelvin as a young priest. The moment Gerard attacked, Kelvin instantly dodged while correcting him as well. He was not a priest. His name was Kelvin. Without hesitation, Kelvin launched a wind blade attack directly toward Gerard. However, Gerard effortlessly deflected the attack. Then he turned toward Kelvin with visible surprise on his face. Clotho immediately bombarded Gerard with a barrage of water attacks. However, Gerard calmly grabbed hold of the slime and slammed it into the ground with overwhelming force. Then he forcefully pulled down Clotho's tentacles as if restraining a wild beast. Kelvin became surprised seeing Gerard effortlessly block every single one of his attacks, including Clotho's hidden strike. Melfina quickly explained that Gerard was using clairvoyance. With that ability, Gerard could predict incoming attacks slightly ahead of time and react before they fully happened. Gerard quietly reminded Kelvin that he needed to fight with everything he had. Otherwise, this battle would become meaningless. Immediately afterward, Gerard launched another attack directly toward Kelvin. Kelvin grinned and activated Cliff Wall. At the same time, the slime Gerard had been holding suddenly began glowing brightly before violently exploding apart. Gerard immediately realized what happened. Clotho had used self-destruct. Even Gerard admitted that the slime possessed far more tricks than expected. However, Gerard quickly shifted his focus back to combat. Now it was time for Kelvin to experience his swordsmanship personally. Gerard swung his sword and unleashed another devastating strike toward Kelvin. Melfina urgently warned Kelvin to dodge sideways immediately with everything he had. Gerard had just activated his airburst skill. Kelvin barely escaped in time and admitted that the attack had been dangerously fast. He could not even properly see the attack pattern at all. Without hesitation, Kelvin activated ground split. The earth instantly cracked apart beneath Gerard's feet. Even in that unstable situation, Gerard still swung his sword toward Kelvin while attacking at the same time. Kelvin barely managed to dodge again at the last possible moment. Kelvin could not help but acknowledge Gerard's strength. Even while losing his footing, Gerard was still capable of launching precise counterattacks. However, Gerard realized something too late. Behind him, Clotho had already recovered and thrust a sword directly toward him. The slime stood once more, ready to continue fighting. Gerard immediately prepared another counterattack and slashed through Clotho's body again. Kelvin admitted that Gerard truly was incredibly strong. There was no denying that anymore. However, Kelvin then activated his extreme gravitational force skill. An overwhelming gravitational pressure instantly pinned Gerard down against the ground. Gerard questioned what kind of power this was. Kelvin calmly explained that the skill increased the gravitational pull surrounding the opponent while restraining their movements. If Gerard was not careful, the pressure itself could crush him completely. Even so, Gerard struggled against the weight and slowly began forcing himself back upward. He declared that this level of pressure still was not enough to break him. Against all expectations, Gerard actually managed to stand back up. Then suddenly, Gerard's eyes widened. At that moment, forgotten memories finally resurfaced inside his mind. A voice named Zildra echoed through his memories, declaring that they had fallen under the control of the Rizia Empire. The Holy Kingdom of Doramisu needed to be destroyed. The words had originally been spoken to the dear king of Arukal. Arukal was once a peaceful kingdom that focused mainly on agriculture. Even though it was considered a relatively small country, its people lived together in harmony. To Gerard, it was a warm homeland filled with peace. However, everything changed one day when an envoy from the western continent arrived at their castle. The messenger was an elf named Zildra, sent by the kingdom of Rizia. The moment Gerard heard Zildra's proposal, he reacted in disbelief and questioned whether the elf truly understood what he was demanding. However, the king immediately ordered Gerard to stay silent. Then the king calmly informed Zildra that his answer would not change. Arukal had no intention of waging war against the Holy Kingdom of Doramisu. Because of that, the king politely asked the envoy to leave their land. That same day, Zildra departed while leaving behind a chilling threat. If Arukal refused to obey the wishes of Rizia, then the kingdom would eventually pay for its insolence. Not long afterward, disaster struck. A mysterious disease began spreading among the soldiers. Soon, the epidemic engulfed the entire kingdom. People desperately tried to flee, but countless citizens died one after another. Before long, the streets of Arukal became filled with corpses. Amid those horrifying memories, Gerard's trembling voice called out a single name. Betty. Betty lay on her deathbed, already consumed by the disease. Even in her condition, she begged Gerard to survive for the sake of their daughter, Coney. Gerard desperately swore that he would do everything possible to save their child. However, as Betty slipped away before his eyes, Gerard broke down in grief while begging her not to leave him. Even the king eventually succumbed to the epidemic. Only a few days later, the kingdom of Arukal completely perished. As Gerard traveled through the ruined land, even his loyal horse eventually collapsed and drew its final breath. Gerard quietly thanked the horse for remaining loyal to him until the very end. As a knight, he wanted to bury his companion properly. However, Gerard himself had already reached his physical and emotional limit. He no longer knew what to do anymore. Then, in the middle of that despair, Gerard suddenly remembered something. He softly asked Coney whether she wanted some candy. However, the child's body had already become wrapped in the same deadly disease. Back in the present, Gerard suddenly exploded in rage. He demanded to know how Kelvin dared challenge the kingdom of Arukal itself. To Gerard, That kingdom had been everything he ever had. Kelvin stared at him in shock, unable to believe the overwhelming hatred now pouring out from Gerard. Then Gerard forcefully pushed back against the extreme gravitational force, pinning him down. Gerard roared at the young priest to die. Kelvin quickly activated Wall Cliff in an attempt to defend himself, but Gerard instantly shattered the barrier apart. The next moment, Gerard stepped forward, and the sheer impact of his attack sent Kelvin flying backward. Kelvin looked up just in time to see Gerard leap into the air while raising his sword overhead. Gerard declared that nothing in this world could ever compensate for the torment he endured. Kelvin gritted his teeth and activated extreme gravitational force once again. This time, Kelvin shouted for Gerard to stay down. Gerard's body slammed into the ground under the crushing pressure, yet he still groaned while struggling to resist it. Kelvin then gave a signal to Clotho. Clotho immediately opened its mouth wide. At the same time, Kelvin activated maximum overdrive. Moments later, Gerard finally collapsed onto the floor while weakly mumbling the names Coney and Betty. And just like that, the battle inside the dungeon came to an end. Later, back at the guild, the receptionist announced that the results had finally been confirmed. The piece of armor Kelvin brought back had been confirmed to truly belong to the Dark Spirit Knight. That alone proved the request had been successfully completed. The moment the guild confirmed it, the surrounding adventurers immediately erupted into cheers for Kelvin. One adventurer praised him as an unbelievable newcomer. Another openly admired the fact that Kelvin managed to defeat the infamous Dark Knight himself. Someone else admitted that Cashel's arrogant attitude had always irritated him, so seeing Kelvin deal with everything honestly felt satisfying. The receptionist then called Kelvin forward and explained that the mission itself had already been reclassified as exceeding D-rank difficulty. Even so, Kelvin still completed it successfully without failing. Because of that, the guildmaster personally decided to raise Kelvin's rank as a special exception in recognition of his accomplishments. The receptionist then admitted she was genuinely relieved that everything turned out safely. From her perspective, Kelvin constantly managed to accomplish things that left everyone around him amazed. Kelvin awkwardly admitted that even he was surprised himself. He honestly never expected Gerard to be that overwhelmingly strong. Later on, as Kelvin walked upstairs, another voice suddenly spoke nearby. The voice casually pointed out that the receptionist girl was actually pretty cute when thinking about it carefully. The one who made the comment was Gerard himself. At some point, Gerard had officially been added into Kelvin's list of subordinates. There were still 7 empty slots remaining. Among the current members were Melfina, Clotho the Slime Gratonia at level 15, and Gerard the Dark Spirit Knight at level 53. Gerard casually suggested that the receptionist might actually make a suitable woman to stand beside his king, Kelvin. Melfina immediately reacted and told Gerard to wait a second. According to her, that receptionist was supposedly destined to become her master's soulmate. Gerard looked genuinely surprised after hearing that. He immediately told Melfina not to suddenly invent ridiculous stories like that out of nowhere. As far as Gerard remembered, nobody had ever arranged any engagement for his king. However, Melfina firmly insisted that she was telling the truth. Kelvin shouted in frustration and demanded that the two of them stop messing around inside his head already. He reminded Gerard that he had specifically told him to stop calling him a young priest. However, that did not mean Gerard suddenly had permission to start calling him a king instead. Gerard calmly replied that the man this night served was naturally destined to become a king someday. Kelvin immediately turned toward Melfina and pointed out that he certainly did not remember ever becoming engaged to her either. In his eyes, Melfina was obviously only sticking around because she wanted an excuse to avoid handling all of her troublesome divine responsibilities. Suddenly, Melfina interrupted and informed her master that someone was standing ahead nearby. Kelvin instantly accused her of trying to distract him from the conversation again. However, the moment he looked toward the window, he realized she had actually been telling the truth. An old man stood there calmly and casually commented that the weather today was lovely. According to him, it felt like the perfect day for someone like Kelvin to head out on another adventure. Kelvin's eyes widened slightly before he confidently replied that he truly was overflowing with energy right now and felt ready to go out and kick some ass. The old man laughed softly and praised the spirit coming from such a young adventurer. However, he also warned Kelvin not to forget to properly rest his body every once in a while. Kelvin immediately pointed out that this old man was the one who started the entire topic in the first place. Then Kelvin quickly realized who he was speaking with. The old man standing before him was the guild master himself. The old man quietly admitted that the famous Kelvin truly was sharp. Kelvin's deduction was completely correct. He introduced himself as Rio, the guild master of the Paza branch of the Adventurers Guild. Rio then explained that there was something he personally wanted to ask Kelvin. The moment Kelvin heard that, his eyes widened again. Instantly, he realized what had just happened. Rio had already activated an A-rank skill called Eye of Inspection. Then Rio directly asked whether Kelvin was an otherworld wanderer. Kelvin cursed inwardly the moment he understood the situation completely. His conceal skill had only reached B rank. Against Ryo's A rank inspection ability, his secret had finally been exposed. Shortly afterward, inside the inn located within Guild Pazu, Ryo calmly explained that he had already heard the full story from Unju regarding what happened to Cashel. He also heard that Kelvin was the one who defeated the Dark Spirit Knight. However, Ryo quickly corrected himself. More accurately, it was Kelvin together with his subordinate who achieved it. That alone confirmed Ryo's suspicions. Kelvin was a summoner. At that moment, Kelvin felt completely cornered. Until now, the highest-ranked skill user he had encountered in the city only possessed C-rank abilities. Because of that, he genuinely believed raising his conceal skill to B rank would be enough to keep his secrets hidden safely. However, he never expected someone possessing an A-rank Eye of Inspection to exist this close to him. For a brief moment, Kelvin could not even respond. Then suddenly, Gerard's voice echoed inside his consciousness and told him to stay calm. Gerard reminded him that his status was never something he could hide forever anyway. The truly important thing now was increasing the number of trustworthy allies who could share his secrets safely. Melfina immediately added that they would always remain by Kelvin's side no matter what happened. Hearing that made Kelvin realize they were absolutely right. Having subordinates like them truly was reassuring. After calming himself, Kelvin finally asked Ryo what exactly he wanted from him. Ryo thought quietly for a moment before answering honestly. He had no intention of becoming Kelvin's enemy. In fact, Ryo actually hoped to receive Kelvin's assistance instead. Ryo then revealed that he had once met another wanderer from another world just like Kelvin. That individual had been summoned as a hero by the Holy Kingdom of Doramisu. The revelation immediately caught Kelvin's attention. In his mind, he wondered whether this hero was the same person Melfina mentioned being transferred here before him. Ryo continued explaining that the Holy Maiden of Doramisu, the one chosen by the gods, performed rituals capable of summoning heroes from other worlds. According to her prophecies, the return of the Demon King was approaching rapidly. Hearing that immediately made Kelvin nervous. In his mind, Kelvin started connecting everything together. Perhaps the reason demons across the continent recently became far more aggressive was directly tied to the Demon King's return. Even Gerard, the Dark Knight Kelvin fought earlier, possessed abnormal strength because of those events. Ryo then explained the harsh reality of the situation. No matter how many heroes the kingdom summoned, it would still be impossible for them to run across the entire continent protecting every single place on their own. Ryo explained that if the Demon King truly returned once again, then defeating him would naturally become the highest priority above everything else. Kelvin quickly summarized the situation in his own words. In the end, Ryo was essentially asking him to deal with dangerous demonic threats on behalf of the summoned heroes. Ryo admitted that Kelvin's understanding was correct. At the moment, the people stationed in this region simply did not have enough capable adventurers who could reliably handle B-rank requests or anything above that level. Of course, Ryo assured him that the rewards would absolutely match the effort required. On top of that, there would also be many additional benefits for Kelvin personally. Just like before, the guild could even raise Kelvin's adventurer rank through special exceptions if necessary. Kelvin admitted that Ryo was surprisingly persuasive. Ryo smiled calmly and reminded Kelvin that he intentionally kept both Kelvin's summoner abilities and his identity as an otherworld wanderer hidden from everyone else. Naturally, Ryo wondered if Kelvin understood why he did that. According to Ryo, someone like Kelvin definitely would not want to get dragged into the tedious political struggles between nobles and powerful factions. Therefore, if Kelvin agreed to cooperate with him, then the first thing Ryo could guarantee in return was Kelvin's freedom. Melfina quietly commented that Ryo had already cornered Kelvin completely with those conditions. Ryo then continued his explanation. No ordinary person should have been capable of using summoning abilities at Kelvin's current level cap. Based on that alone, Ryo estimated that Kelvin's actual combat ability already rivaled an A-rank adventurer despite his official status. Ryo then asked Kelvin directly whether he truly had no desire to climb even higher as an adventurer, especially before other organizations eventually discovered his real identity for themselves. After thinking it over, Kelvin finally agreed to form an alliance with Ryo. Honestly, Ryo's conditions were not bad at all from Kelvin's perspective. The two of them then shook hands and finalized the agreement. Later on, back at the Singing Spirit Inn, a cheerful female voice excitedly mentioned hearing the news that Kelvin had already been promoted to a B-rank adventurer. At that moment, Kelvin was being tightly hugged by Kulea herself. Kelvin commented that Kulea really learned about information quickly. Kulea happily explained that rumors about Kelvin were already spreading rapidly among the younger adventurers. To celebrate such a huge achievement, she planned on making even more delicious meals for him today. Kelvin immediately celebrated hearing that. In his opinion, Kulea's cooking was always the best. At that moment, Gerard suddenly appeared and addressed Kelvin as his king. Gerard started wondering if Kulea might also be one of Kelvin's. Before Gerard could finish the sentence, Kelvin immediately denied it. Kulea was absolutely not some destined soulmate or anything like that. She was simply the owner of the inn who had helped him countless times during the past few weeks. Meanwhile, Melfina quietly sulked after hearing Kelvin reject the idea so quickly. Kelvin immediately told Melfina not to make the situation even more confusing than it already was. Then Kelvin asked Kulea if she could prepare one extra serving for dinner tonight instead. Kulea happily gave Kelvin a thumbs up in response. As Kelvin walked outside afterward, Gerard immediately asked his king where he was heading next. Kelvin casually answered that he was going to the slave market. The moment Gerard heard that, he quietly walked away while muttering to himself. In Gerard's mind, his king was still in the middle of his youthful growing stage, so naturally Kelvin was overflowing with energy. No, perhaps it was simply because Kelvin was finally becoming a proper man. In that case, the sooner Kelvin became accustomed to these kinds of matters, the better it would be for him. Kelvin immediately shouted that Gerard was completely misunderstanding the situation. He told Gerard to stop connecting ordinary matters with dirty thoughts and openly called him an old pervert. Meanwhile, Melfina asked whether Kelvin planned to search for a suitable slave and train them in order to strengthen his party further. Kelvin praised Melfina for figuring it out so quickly. Even if she had become somewhat rusty, she was still a goddess in the end. Melfina instantly denied being rusty at all. Kelvin then admitted honestly that his battle against Gerard overwhelmed him more than he expected. From now on, fights on that level would likely happen far more often. Because of that, he wanted to improve the combat strength of his entire group as soon as possible. If possible, Kelvin preferred finding someone who had never served another master before. Then, after a short pause, Kelvin bluntly admitted that he specifically wanted a female slave. Gerard immediately glanced toward him suspiciously. Kelvin frustratingly complained that there was no helping it. Melfina always twisted things in the same direction too. Gerard calmly replied that he understood completely. In fact, he believed he now understood his king perfectly well. Suddenly, Kelvin heard loud screaming nearby. A burning man suddenly ran past him in panic while his body was engulfed in flames. Another man chased after him while holding a cloth and desperately asked if he was all right. Gerard observed the commotion and assumed some kind of conflict must have broken out between the customers and the slave traders. However, Kelvin pointed out the obvious problem. The man earlier had literally been on fire. The burned customer angrily shouted at the trader, demanding to know why anyone would try selling something like that. According to him, the slave was cursed. Inside a cage nearby, a female slave sat breathing heavily while tears filled her eyes. The moment Kelvin saw her, he realized he had actually seen this girl before. The slave trader explained that she was a demi-human he acquired only a few days ago. However, the girl carried an incredibly powerful curse. Anything that touched her body immediately burst into flames. Kelvin then called out to Melfina and asked what kind of skill would be necessary to remove a curse like this. Melfina explained that the condition appeared to be the curse of the Fire Dragon King. To lift something at that level, an A-rank skill such as God's Salvation would probably be required. After hearing that, Kelvin immediately turned toward the shopkeeper and asked why he did not simply sell the slave to him instead. The shopkeeper became visibly surprised. He admitted that he personally had no issue with it, but he warned Kelvin that he would take absolutely no responsibility if Kelvin ended up injured because of the curse. Kelvin calmly accepted those terms and declared that they had a deal. Inside the cage, the female slave slowly lifted her head and looked directly toward Kelvin. Afterward, Kelvin and the slave quietly left the market together while she followed behind him. As they walked, the slave softly thanked Kelvin for purchasing her earlier. She introduced herself as Ethel. Kelvin then asked how Ethel ended up becoming a slave in the first place. Ethel fell silent for a moment before finally answering. From the moment she first became aware of the world around her, she had already been a slave. According to the people around her, her parents sold her immediately after she was born. She never even learned what her parents looked like. She did not know why she carried such a terrible curse either. Kelvin quietly understood after hearing her story. In his eyes, Ethel had clearly lived through an extremely painful life. When Kelvin tried reaching toward her, Ethel instantly panicked and begged him to stop. She desperately explained that she no longer wanted to hurt anyone else ever again. However, Kelvin calmly assured her that everything would be fine. He simply told her to trust him. Ethel slowly opened her eyes. At that moment, a bright glow appeared the instant Kelvin touched her. Then Kelvin gently held her hand. Ethel became shocked by what happened. Kelvin quietly admitted that he could never fully understand how much suffering Ethel experienced throughout her life. However, starting from today onward, he swore that he would never allow her to feel that kind of pain again. Ethel's body trembled as she stared at her own hands in disbelief. Kelvin gently reassured her that everything was all right now. From this point onward, she would never accidentally hurt anyone again. The moment she realized the truth, Ethel broke down crying. The curse had finally been lifted completely. Without hesitation, she immediately threw herself forward and tightly hugged Kelvin while tears streamed down her face. Kelvin simply smiled warmly in response. At that moment, Melfina called out to him. Kelvin finally understood what had just happened himself. He had used A-rank white magic, God's salvation. Just moments earlier, he spent all of his remaining spare points to raise his white magic all the way to A-rank specifically for this purpose. Later on, back at the inn, Kelvin apologized to Kulea for making her wait so long. Kulea then called Ethel forward and encouraged her to properly show herself to her new master. Ethel slowly stepped out wearing a maid outfit. Kelvin became completely surprised by the sight. Ethel immediately apologized for suddenly bursting into tears earlier. Since childhood, she had never truly been able to trust anyone else. That was why the kindness Kelvin showed her made her unbelievably happy. Then Ethel noticed Kelvin staring blankly at her and softly called out to her master. Kelvin quickly apologized and admitted that he almost could not recognize Ethel anymore. In his eyes, she looked incredibly beautiful. Ethel immediately blushed deeply after hearing that. She then declared that she wanted to prove her worth to her master properly. For that reason, she asked Kelvin to allow her to help him as an adventurer from now on. Kelvin simply smiled after hearing her request. Meanwhile, far away on the outskirts of Pazu, inside the D-level prison known as the Cave of the Lurker, an overwhelming magical presence suddenly entered the area. Several people desperately ran through the area in complete panic while trying to escape from something terrifying behind them. One of the men shouted that they needed to get away immediately. He warned the others to keep running no matter what happened and absolutely not to look back. The man desperately tried reassuring everyone that they could still make it out alive. According to him, they had already escaped from the secret chamber itself. Now all they had to do was survive long enough to report everything to the guild immediately. However, one of the men could not resist glancing backward for a moment. The instant he looked behind him, his face turned pale in horror. The being sealed inside that chamber was none other than the legendary demon itself.